like Jovi said, feel free to jump in with any questions at any point in time. It's meant to be interactive as we go through it. And so I'm going to share out kind of a lot of the lessons I've learned from working at companies like G2 and Help Scout, as well as kind of last year and a half, I've been full-time advising earlier stage startups, consulting, helping them figure out their go-to-market strategy. So a little bit about me. I am based in Leeds. I've got 4 kids. You can see them there. I also have 2 dogs. We just moved over from Chicago this past summer. And I currently run Curtis, where I help startups build and execute their growth strategies. So why listen to me? I always kind of like to give this slide because I think there's a lot of experts, especially in the marketing world, who you see online talking about things. I've been lucky enough to work with some of the best companies in SaaS, G2, Thrive, which is $1 billion company, Help Scout, all these different companies, and I've learned a ton along the way. I still have a lot to learn, but I want to share out a lot of what I've figured out of really what boils down to kind of 4 principles of what makes growth possible at an early stage startup. And I'm going to go through it and set the stage a little bit, but then also I'm going to get some tactical things in here as well, because I hate when workshops are just super high level and you're like, okay, that's a great theory, but like, what am I supposed to actually do with that in practice? And so we're going to get into the weeds a little bit too. And if we have time at the end, do a little exercise. So I guess the first thing is, right, you're all here and you all run companies. You need to grow. And in 2023, you have to do it efficiently. You probably always had to do it efficiently, but there's more of a pressure on it this year than ever. And so really what's at stake with growth when you think about it, you know, your profitability, if that's what you're going after, or if you're trying to raise, hiring and attracting the best talent on your teams, ability to reinvest back into the product, and keeping a lot of the talent you have as you start to build out your team, are really a lot of the big things when you think about growth that directly impact these things. And so the problem is growth is really hard to do, and figuring out where you actually place your bets, what channels, how do you actually scale is not an easy thing to figure out. It's one of the harder things. Excuse me, I'm going to give you an example. So if I was starting a new ABM company, and I obviously am not a designer, and I was selling to a VP of marketing and I need to grow at 50%, let's say for next year. Here's my VP of marketers. There's 100 here. Easy enough. I've identified the people I need to go after are these types of companies and the 100 people I want to start selling into. Let's just go after these 100 people. The problem with that really is studies kind of shown only at any given time 4 to 5% of the market is actually buying your solution in any given month or quarter, right? And so actually, out of those 100 people, I can actually only sell to probably 4 of those people right now. And so when you think about it, it cuts down a lot in terms of what you're trying to do. On top of that, if I'm in this ABM space and I sell contacts, I'm also competing against all the other companies that also do this within the ABM contact space, right? There's, 15, 20 companies here that are all going after that same buyer, very similar message, very similar approach. I'm actually not even competing against those people. I'm competing against everyone in the ABM space, right? When you think about it, because there's so much overlap, and especially if you sell to marketers, really anyone now, budget has gotten really tight. And so people are really scrutinizing, I think, their tech stack and where they're spending money and how they're investing. So all of these companies are actually going after those 4 VPs of marketing, right? And so it's not just the context column, it's really all these different categories. So now I'm competing against 100 companies. And the reality is this is what it probably truly looks like, right? Which is the MarTech 10,000 or 12,000 or whatever it's up to. These are all companies that are all selling to the VP of marketing role, just like I am. And then on top of that, you probably have recruiters, you have all these other kind of noise factors. And so how do you actually grow? How do you actually get the attention of your buyer is a big thing we're going to talk about today, because it's harder now than ever to actually scale and build in marketing programs that can really grow. And then you factor in the channels you could go after. And so I took 5 minutes to write down a bunch of different things you could be doing. there's Twitter, there's podcasts, there's affiliates, there's co-marketing, there's product tours, your outbound emails, intent data. There's all these different things at your disposal as a company, which is amazing to go after these people. But the reality is, like, you can't do all of it. So how do you actually focus in? And this isn't meant to be all doom and gloom. There's an answer to some of this, right? And so when you kind of look at it at the surface, you're like, wow, there's a lot of factors lined up against me. So if we're not doing it really well and really focused on what we're doing, it's very easy to get spread super thin, where you try to be everywhere and everything to everyone. So the first kind of core principle, when I've seen growth at companies, is really focus and speed are your unfair advantage. So when you think about all those competitors in the space now, as a marketing team, as a growth team, as a company, even getting really focused in on what you want to be accomplishing is going to make all the difference in the world. And so this is not a marketing strategy. These are all just channels and tactics and things you could be doing. But again, you have constraints as a business, and those constraints are actually really good. Those constraints help you make better decisions, right? Because if you just have a blank canvas, it's really hard to say, like, what should we be doing? But the reality is, when you look at it, you look at all these channels, you actually can write down your constraints and map it up against it to see what makes the most sense. Like, we don't have unlimited budget. We have $5,000 this month. So, like, we're probably not doing display ads. We're probably not going to scale up some of these things, right? Like, we don't have an outbound sales team, so we're not doing outbound. And so you can quickly figure out, like, what are the constraints you have within your business to hone in on where you should be focusing. And really, I think how I like to think about growth is in 4 big buckets. And it's really your brand and known. So this is, the blog, the podcast, your website, all the stuff that you actually own as a company. The pros to trying to scale and grow through your own brand and own channels, it offsets a lot. So when I was at Help Scout, we grew traffic to about 300,000 people a month. And when COVID happened, we cut our paid budget from about 70,000 a month to about 10,000 a month. And the great thing was, we were having about 800 trials a month just coming through the website organically. So when we cut off all the other stuff, it was kind of the gift that kept on giving. If we didn't do any marketing during COVID or spend any marketing dollars, we still had an inbound flow, right? And so, so I think it can offset a lot of marketing spend and help your model a ton. The problem is, sometimes it can take a long time to build. It's not just like a flip the switch and suddenly we have thousands of people coming to the website every single month. And then I look at it in terms of earned media. And so this is where you have PR, content collaborations, webinars, and basically, like, how do you get in front of other people's audiences? And so I think the con on this one is it's very tricky. If you've ever been on a podcast, you might notice, like, I went on this podcast, I'm not sure what came out of it, right? Or I come and do a workshop for people. I don't know what comes out of it. Maybe in 3 months, you're talking to someone and then they say, like, oh, do you know anyone who does growth marketing? And you say, actually, I saw this guy give a speech or do a workshop. I attended and he was great. Like, you should reach out to him. And then I'll get an inbound lead 3 months. That happens pretty routinely. I think when you think about earned media and some of those things that you could be doing as a company. And so I think that's the one, but it's a little tricky to actually track. And then paid media is the third bucket I think about when I think about growth. And this is, dollars in, dollars out. I think the tricky part about paid media and trying to scale through this, there's lots of variables outside of your control. So there's seasonality impact, there's competitors. So if someone comes in and decides to just overbid on everything, you're just not going to be able to compete as much. And then once you stop spending in these channels, you're off the hamster wheel, right? Like the inbound lead flow stops at some point. And so that's a tricky bet to try to just scale through just that. And there's lots of factors that go into it, right? When you think about paid media, you might look and see, like, hey, our competitors in these 3 spots are all doing it, so we should be doing it. What you might not realize is, well, the reason they can afford to do it is because they're getting 1,000 trials coming inbound organic every single month. So it offsets their overall marketing budget. So they can spend extra, or they have a better upsell path, so they can spend more to acquire these leads. And the fourth bucket is growth loops. And so thinking about, how do I get more out of what's already coming to me. So this could be new subscribers to your newsletter. It could be content flows you're already having, how to get more out of your traffic, referral programs, all these different things and levers that you could start baking into kind of the user experience. Stop there real quick. Any questions about kind of what we covered so far? No. Okay, cool. And then, so we talked about all those different channels, and one of the common things I see a lot of companies do is when I ask them, like, show me what you're doing now in marketing, or show me your approach to growth. What you normally get is a team that's 2-3 people or 1 or 2 people, very early stage, and it's like, well, we're doing LinkedIn ads, we're spending $1,500 there, we're doing some Facebook, we're posting on social, we've got a few blog posts every single month. They're doing lots of little things, but it's not really like amounting to much. And the reality is, how to think about growth is more like a farmer would, right? If you had 8 fields, and disclaimer, I'm not a farmer, but if you had 8 fields, you basically want to get it so that one field is producing, because the work you spend to get something up and going is a lot harder than it is to go into maintenance mode, right? And so you also want to be able to speed up your cycles of learning. So if you're going to say, like, Facebook's where we want to start testing and where we want to experiment first, don't have your marketer or your marketing team also try to do 7 other things at the same time. Time box it and say, like, in a month, can we get Facebook to a spot where we are acquiring leads for $50? And what's the strategy here? And really spend lots of cycles going at one thing to get it up and sustainable. And now you have something that's producing for you, and you can continue to stack and build upon it versus just kind of spreading yourself really thin across a bunch of channels. Because over the course of, a few years, ultimately you end up with all of these different channels that are actually producing for you, right? When you look at companies like a G2 now, where they have 700 people on the team, when I was there, we weren't doing all the stuff that they're doing today. We didn't have an affiliate program. We didn't have kind of this partnership model. We didn't have all these different things. We started to build those out and continuously compound that. And so now they're at a stage where they have all these things that are actually producing results for them on any given month, right? That's bringing in all these different leads and growth for them, right? So it's offsetting each other. So they're de-risked in a lot of ways, where they're not just betting it all on one specific channel. I think the other big thing with marketing teams, it's very easy to get marketing teams to think just big picture, like, here's our 6-month marketing plan. It's very hard to get them to think way more tactical. And so one of the big beliefs I have and the way I've operated marketing teams in the past is getting the team to ship faster, to really fail faster, right? Because most of what you actually do in marketing won't work. That's the reality, right? You might launch on Facebook and your initial ads don't perform. So how quickly can you get that learning out of the way and say, like, okay, nobody's clicking on the ads, we need better creative. Let's get new creative and test that next week. And now everyone's clicking on the ads, but nobody's converting. So how do we test the landing page? And really, like, getting that team into a rhythm where they're shipping almost like a product team every 2 weeks, and just working in like sprint mode, especially at an earlier stage, right? Where you can work in those sprint modes to factor in, like, what's the most important thing we should be doing? And then how's our attention going to it? And so I think working in those kinds of mindsets as a marketing team does a couple of things early on. One, it keeps everyone laser focused on what goal is this actually rolling up to. And so a lot of times founders are the worst enemies of marketers, and you get junior marketers who aren't maybe as comfortable pushing back to a CEO or a founder. And so when they hear, a founder say something, it's like, okay, I should be doing that. And so now their attention goes there, right? And I've seen this so many times where I talk to the marketer and it's like, why are you doing these 10 things? And it's like, oh, well, the CEO keeps asking for it, right? Keeps sending me these Slack messages or emails about it. And so we're just doing all these things. And then I talk to the CEO and he's like, well, I didn't mean to do it all now. I'm just giving them ideas, right? And as I see this, but I think it's very helpful if you align on those North Star goals first, for the team to be able to push back and say, like, hey, okay, awesome, we can do that. but what goal does that impact? And here's what we're working on in these next 2 weeks. If we can put it in the backlog, and then we can address it maybe in the next sprint or whatever it might be. And so you're equipping the team in a way so they can stay focused, right? Because you get a lot of ideas thrown at you early on as a marketer. And so you want to kind of empower the team to have that ability to prioritize. It also will help you a lot from just burning out kind of the team, right? Because you can measure a little bit more about what are their outputs and what are they actually doing. So the next big principle we're going to talk about is understanding that kind of what I talked about earlier. 95% of people aren't in the market at any given time for your solution. And so I've seen stats where it says 10%, where it's 5, 4. But overall, if you think about it, most people aren't actively looking to buy whatever solution it is that you're selling. And so if you knew that only 5% of the people are actually in market at any given time, it really makes you rethink your objectives, rethink your creative, and how you're distributing. Because the reality is, like, you want to get in front of those 5%. You also need to start building relationships and getting in front of those 95%, right? And so you wouldn't necessarily go to all 100 people and say, here, take a demo. And I think that's one of the things you see a lot of times companies are running, where it's like, we're running demo ads and that's all we're running. We have no intent data behind it or anything like that. And the performance of these ads are horrible. But the reality is, like, most people don't know your company yet. You haven't built up any sort of relationship with them. Why would they want a demo? And even if they did want a demo, only 5% of them are going to want it. So by running ads like that, you're automatically eliminating 95% of your audience. And so figuring out what are the other ways we can get people to start engaging with our brand, right? It doesn't always have to be a demo. Is it a free offering that you have? Like Bonsai does a great job at this, where they have contract templates. They do contract software, but what we realized was designers aren't looking for software. They're looking for a free contract template, a PDF, a Word doc, because that's what they want. And so figuring out, like, oh, they're actually not even searching for software. So we're bidding on these software terms, we're trying to rank for it. We're actually not getting these people. They're one step further away from that. They're looking for templates. So let's give them the templates, even though that's completely counterintuitive, because it's the problem we actually solve, is not having these things. Let's give them the templates, but then as that process, let's give them an interesting way to start getting into the product, right? And so if you go on Bonsai or research like web designer templates, contract template, you'll find a PDF that they offer. And it's like, awesome, do you want to customize this template? Cool, put your name in and your company. Who do you want to send it to? And you start basically using the product, even though you came in looking for a PDF template or a Word template. And before you know it, you're actually using Bonsai and you've created an account and you're sending out the contract through there, right? And so figuring out what are those hooks. If you just offer someone, get contract software, they don't want a software, they want a template, right? And so you really need to understand your audience and think about what's valuable to them, or what would be valuable to them, even if they're not in the market for my solution right now. And that's really what it comes down to, is demand capture versus kind of brand awareness, which are the two different kind of tactics, right? And so same thing, right? We talked about the 4-5% of people, but when you think about it from a marketing effort and marketing spend standpoint, you're also wildly inefficient if you're spending $100 to go out after these 100 people to get a demo, because what's happening is you're spreading your dollars. I have $1 to spend on every single one of you to try to capture your demand. Well, 95% of those dollars I may as well light on fire, because most people are going to see it and just ignore it, right? Versus if I could figure out who's in markets, and we're going to go through some of the tactics of how you can actually do that. I could actually get really targeted and say, like, okay, I know the 4 people out of these 100 who are actually actively shopping for a solution this month. Let me go and spend money to get in front of those people. And now I have $25 each to spend on those different tactics, right? And so when you think about your marketing, it's important to break it up into those 2 different buckets, because it really changes kind of your approach. And I'll give you another example, because we've been talking about paid in the content world. So when I led the marketing team at Help Scout, what we found was, when we looked at the data, about 60 to 70% of the time, the initial inbound who came in and started the free trial was actually the founder of the company. What then quickly happens is they don't use the product. They just invite in their head of CS or whoever it might be. And then basically their account ends up getting deleted, or they're never part of the main paid program. When you look at the initial sign-up offerings, it was them who kind of came in. And so we realized we weren't creating any content for that audience. And so we created content called a microsite called In the Works that was just founder stories, and basically sharing out stories for founders. And it wasn't just the hyper-growth unicorn stories. It was like, who are our actual founders? They're small businesses, right? They're people with 10 people on the team. They're not people who are, billion-dollar companies and billion-dollar valuations and closing $100 million rounds. That's not our audience. And so we started creating content that was focused in around that. And so that's an example of the brand awareness play, because we wanted more of them to become aware of us as a brand at Help Scout. We did a similar thing for the support people, which is our other audience, right? Where we started basically like a Dear Abby type of newsletter called The Supportive, where people would write in with questions and we would answer it. And it was way more conversational. It wasn't about our product. It wasn't about anything outside of like what it's like to work in customer service. And so those are two like brand awareness plays where we got really good engagement, and we were getting like monthly activity on social, on all these things that we were doing here. There was no direct correlation to sign up necessarily, but oftentimes when someone would be talking to sales, would be like, oh, I love your content. And the amount of times we would hear that was amazing. So there's definitely something there that we could point back to say, like, it's clearly having an impact in terms of what we're doing. On the flip side, we also did like high intent content, what we called, which was, hey, someone's searching for gorgeous alternatives. We want to be showing up, right? And so we created lots of content around this topic, right? And this is like, how do we get in front of the 5%? When someone's searching gorgeous alternative, they're not just doing it for fun, right? They're either a gorgeous customer looking for an option because they're going to cancel, or they're actively in a conversation with gorgeous and want to see what else is out there. And so for us, we figured out like, who are our top 20 competitors? How much search volume are these things getting? And how do we create content to start ranking for these different searches, right? And so, and we started doing this across a lot of different things. And again, how we measured each thing was different. In the Works and our supportive, we were measuring newsletter subscribers and how much time was spent on the page and how much overall traffic we were getting. This post got 30 visitors a month. It wasn't a huge volume, but those are 30 really high intent people, right? And we would get 8 signups from those. And when we looked at the conversion rates of those 8 signups, it was like 60% actually moved into a contract, right? And so for us, like these types of posts mattered a lot. And so when you think about your marketing, even in your content approach, like breaking it out to kind of in-market, demand capture, and out of market, how do we build up awareness is really important, because you ultimately need both, right? But it's important to know what you're going after when you're building out anything in marketing, because sometimes you're at stages where you are trading like the long-term investment of some of this brand stuff, because I only have one content marketing person. And so, hey, we have numbers to hit, and in the next 6 months, we need to show X amount of growth. Well, then maybe focusing in on some of these high intent kind of searches is where you should have the marketing team focused in on. And so that's kind of one of those examples. Questions around kind of the kind of brand awareness, demand capture piece of it, where I jump into this next section? No. Okay. So I think the next piece, the third kind of principle is don't drown in a sea of sameness. And so this is what I call blands. I think the New York Times had a whole article around it. You've all, and apologies if any of you have the wavy people on your website, but you've all kind of seen this approach in terms of people's websites, people's marketing. It can feel very similar. And so I took that example of ABM tools and I looked up, hey, what do all these different companies say about themselves? What's the main headline on some of their ads? And what you find very quickly is you can go on any company's Facebook page, see the ads they're running. You can go on anyone's LinkedIn page and see the ads they're running. And you find how they talk about the product and what their value pitch is, all starts to sound very similar. And then you look at their creative, and I used a tool called Moat. You can go and find any basically brand's creative. they all look very similar. Like if you told me these were all from the same company, I would believe you. They're all 6 different ABM companies, all in that same category and space, right? And this is not necessarily a knock on them. You can pick any category and probably find something very similar. The problem is also, like, the average person is seeing 4,000 ads a day or some crazy stat like that. And when you think about all those MarTech companies trying to get in front of you, it's really, really hard if you look like everyone else. And so it doesn't have to be maybe some craziness in terms of your brand, but I think the way you approach your brand has to be different, right? Because the number one thing in marketing, before you can do anything of tell someone how amazing your product is, or get them into a demo or give them this amazing offer, is you have to get someone's attention. And you've all probably, if you think about the last time you were on LinkedIn on your phone or Instagram, you've probably scrolled past hundreds of ads without even blinking an eye or realizing it, right? Like the human brain has gotten so good at identifying what's an ad and what's not, that you will just scroll right past. And if you ever notice yourself stopping at an ad, it's important to think like, what about that caught my attention, right? And a lot of times it's like the color, it's something very basic that you can start testing and experimenting with. And so one of the easiest ways, before I jump into this, one of the easiest ways is actually just do it a little bit differently, right? Like look at what your competitors are doing, and look at how everyone else is running these plays, and run ads that look differently, run copy that looks differently, right? Like the goal of the ad is to get someone to stop. The goal of the homepage is to get someone to read it. The subject line is to get someone to open the email. And so how do you do it so it doesn't sound like everyone else, and do it a little bit differently? I'll give you 2 examples here. One is when I was at G2, our best performing ad, we had an amazing design team. They designed all the ads for us. And our best performing ad was something we took a photo of on an iPhone. So I talked to someone at HubSpot, and they were like, oh, our best performing ad is just someone at the desk looking at the camera, and we took their picture, and that's what we run as the ad. And then we just used the copy, of the post to capture people. And so I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And so I added it to our backlog of things we wanted to test. And the next sprint, we tested it. And we literally walked over to someone's desk and we said, hey, can we take a picture of you for an ad? Like, okay. Just like thinking we were going to set up a photo shoot or something, and just took out our iPhone, took a picture of them. We're like, awesome, thanks. And it's just them looking back at the camera. We saw about a 30% drop in basically our cost per click from just running that ad. And it was just a picture of someone at their desk in the office, just looking directly at the camera. And the reason is every ad looks like this. When you see someone posting a selfie, and this is why on like LinkedIn, you see everyone posting selfies and doing these things, because people stop and they engage with it. It captures someone's attention. You see a picture and you're like, oh, who is this person, right? It's way more of something you would more likely engage with than really highly designed ads. And so the other example is within this space, there's a company called Metadata, metadata.io, and basically their brand is all orange. And it's orange, and it's a Ben Franklin picture with dollar signs over his eyes and like this crazy looking brand. And if I put one of their ads on this picture and the screen, it would jump off the screen to you, right? Because you'll see it. And so one of the ways they did it was just like our branding is just going to be very different from how we do it, right? And so, so those are the 2 examples I think of when you're doing your marketing. It's very easy to just say, well, what's everyone else doing? Let's just do something like that, right? It almost feels very safe. And when you have a marketing team and marketers, most of them will default to safe. And so it's important to say like, hey, how are we going to do this differently? How are we going to push the envelope here and not look like everyone else? Because that's ultimately the goal. That's what's going to get you that initial attention that you actually need. And there's limits probably within the brand and what you're trying to build of what you feel comfortable with, but there's tons of ways you can do it. But if you're just rolling out the same playbook as everyone else, you're just making it a lot harder, because it's going to be a lot harder to get your buyer's attention. So I'm going to jump into kind of 5 different ways I think about some of the tactics earlier on, and how you can very tactically, for almost very little to no cost, try to get in front of some of these audiences and things you can do. So the first concept is the concept I call audience drafting. And so there's 3 kind of tactics, but the simple concept is other people already have the audience you want. If you're selling to VPs of marketers, they're already in communities, they're already in Slack groups, they're already subscribed to newsletters. So how do you actually get in front of those people? And it's a concept called audience drafting, which is you basically go to where they are and figure out ways to kind of hijack that audience, right? And so a good example is there's a site called Listen Notes. You can go in there and you could search any category you want, call it B2B marketing, or you could search an individual, and you can see all the top podcasts within that category. It's almost like a Google search for just podcasts. And so from there, if you have a subscription, you can actually get the email address of the host on the subscription. It's like $59 a month. And so one of the big plays I've run at a bunch of different companies, especially early on, is let's identify the top 50 podcasts within our industry, and we should be going on as guests. And so one is go to Listen Notes, identify what are the top 50. And then second from there is what's our unique angle? Like nobody wants to have you on a podcast to come and talk about your product. Most people want to have something around the industry, a topic, something that's a little bit different than what everyone else is talking about. And one of the hardest things about running a podcast is finding good guests who are credible and finding interesting topics to talk about. And so if you can do the work for the person, it makes it really easy. And so the play was, we go on Listen Notes, and every week we'd send out 5 emails, and Listen Notes gives you actually every episode they've done and a transcript. And so we would basically send a pitch that was something like, hey, listen to your last podcast with, Jovi, where you guys talked about X topic. Really thought it was insightful. Would love to come on as a guest on the podcast sometime to talk about X topic, whatever it could be, right? Like it could be something like, interesting ways you can scale for little to no cost. Like I think it would be super helpful for your audience. And the reason I'm qualified to do this talk with you is because, the last 3 years I've been working with startups doing consulting and advising. And so you basically give them, why am I qualified? Here's an interesting topic we can have. And you've shown like you've done a little research into what's actually relevant to their audience. When I've done this in the past, we've gotten 25 to 30% kind of hit rate on people being like, yeah, I would love to have you on. If you did that every week, 5 outreaches, you're basically getting at least 1 podcast every single week that is getting recorded, right? And so over a quarter's time, you've now appeared on 12 podcasts within your industry. You've gotten in front of a big audience that you otherwise wouldn't have. And so it's a very easy way. You can then also take all that content and repurpose it for your own website, for your own social, all these different things you could layer on top of that. But really, like, that's a super simple, low cost way to get in front of other people's audience. The second one is kind of like this concept called permissionless co-marketing, which is basically like do co-marketing without the other company's or person's permissions. And so there's bad examples of this, which you've probably all been randomly tagged in a LinkedIn post before, and where it's like thoughts, and they just tag like a bunch of thought leaders to try to get people to engage. That's like a bad example. A good example is where you're actually celebrating potential customers or prospects, right? And so at G2, one of the big plays we ran was the G2 kind of like a software awards, where basically every quarter or I'm not sure what they're doing now, but the first year we ran it, it was an annual, like the best of software, where we wanted all these top companies talking about G2 online. And so we said, like, what are the top software companies, top 100 in enterprise or in mid-market? And we ran this kind of campaign, and we gave them all the stuff they needed, but we included them in the campaign, whether they wanted to be or not. And so what naturally happened was all these CMOs, these companies were like, hey, amazing. We just got recognized in this thing. Another good example of doing it is you see like design agencies will just call out websites they like, and they're basically doing it to get in front of that person's audience, right? Like a bigger designer or design agency, and saying like, here's a website that does a really good job at conversion. And so, yeah, go ahead. Question.
I recognize that advice, Adam, but I'm kind of the victim of people doing that to me. So one of the things I've noticed on my LinkedIn is people who are launching scheduling tools, liking and commenting on my posts. So because they're trying to, get their new startup in a world where, so what would be your advice for when you're being targeted, as your audience that somebody's trying to hijack?
Yeah, I don't think there's much you can do. People like hijacking or trying to do that to your audience. I would say like I would take it as a sign of like you're onto something good, right? Or you built up a strong enough reputation that people are trying to get in front of your audience in that way. Whether you want to engage or not is up to you, I think. But yeah, does that kind of answer the question?
Well, I suppose I just feel very rude if I ignore them, but then I know if I engage with them, I'm doing exactly what they want me to do. So is it okay? I suppose basically permission to ignore them.
So I've had it happen a bunch to me. I think it depends on the approach, to be honest with you. The approach where it's just like not thought out and I'm tagged with 20 other people, I'm not that interested in engaging with that. If it's more of a well thought out, like, hey, I saw whatever this post and really engage it. Like I've had people take my LinkedIn post and include it in like a roundup in their own LinkedIn post, where it's like, here's my 5 favorite LinkedIn posts from this week. And it's like me and 4 other people. But it's clear they're just doing it to basically like get their own followers, because it's like, I'm going to be publishing this content every week. I'm going to be sharing out my 5 favorite. And it's like, okay, well, you're not really creating the content. You're just curating my content to get more of your own following. But it doesn't hurt me by any means. So I will engage with those. It's a little bit of like what feels okay and doesn't. I don't know. It's kind of this gray world. And I think that's kind of the point, right? Is you can do it really well where actually it makes the company feel positive. Or you can do it in a way where it doesn't feel great, right? And so there's a podcast where I forget the name of it, but basically he spins a wheel and it's 5 companies, and whatever company it lands on, he has a marketer on live and they do a live breakdown of the website. And they're an agency, but they'll say like, oh, here's how we would, if you were the CMO of the company, how would you improve conversion on the site? And you do like a live breakdown of these sites. And he uses that as content to get in front of them because they're all prospects he wants to get in front of. And so then he sends off the video like, hey, here's the full breakdown of what we did. And my company actually can help you with all these different things. But then it comes from a spot of like, it's not him saying it. It's like, this seasoned CMO. And that's how he's getting like 70% of his clients is through this like content kind of promotion thing, right? And so that's an example of like, he's using it as content to get out there. I think that can backfire in some situations probably, right? If you're the CMO of that company, you probably don't love someone breaking down your marketing like that, but those are different ways you can do it for sure. And then I think the other one is other commenters. And so you've probably seen this play before, but a good example of this is there's already people on LinkedIn, to your point, Bridget, that have the audience that you want to get in front of. And so how do you actually get in front of them? One of the easiest ways is there's tons of tools out there. One of the tools I use is the Phantom Busters. You can go scrape everyone who commented on Bridget's post. If you sell to the same audience, or if you sell to marketers, go follow Dave Gerhardt or some of these other people who have huge followings and tons of marketers commenting on their posts. You can scrape everyone who commented, and you don't have to do anything spammy or message them or anything like that, but you could run a simple connection request that happens every single day where you're sending out connection requests to 80 of those people. I think that's the limit on LinkedIn. And so over the course of a year, you're connecting with all these people who are active on LinkedIn, who are your prime audience, who are already kind of expressing interest and intent in topics you're going to be talking about, right? And so when you think about building your own network, suddenly like you can put that on autopilot of the right people. And so that's an easy way over the course of a year, you potentially have, 4,000 or 5,000 marketers in your network. So as you start sharing out content, they're going to see it. They're more likely to engage, all these kinds of things. And so that's just another easy way you could go about doing it. The next one is like, how do you make your marketing more compounding upon one thing should lead to another, right? There should never just be a dead end in marketing. And I think a lot of times when people talk about growth loops, they think within the product, like how do I build in kind of this virality and this experience where one user invites the other. There's also tons of ways you can leverage content growth loops as well. And so a great example, Eddie Schlaner is a copywriter. He runs the website Very Good Copy. He's got about 50,000 followers or 50,000 subscribers. He's amazing. If you don't subscribe to his newsletter, you should if you're interested in copywriting at all. He's a direct response copywriter. He does this really interesting thing in his newsletter, this growth loop, where he basically will post on LinkedIn, let's say Friday morning at 8 a.m., a topic, asking a question or whatever it might be. And then he drops his newsletter right after. And the link in the CTA in the newsletter is like join the conversation. And it's a link back to his LinkedIn post. So what he just does is he gets all 50,000 people, or 2,000 of the 50,000 to go and comment or like his post on LinkedIn, which then suddenly boosts it out to their whole network and gives it this kind of virality, because like LinkedIn sees that and they're like, oh wow, this is taking off, and it gets boosted even more. And the main CTA on his social post is, guess what? Go subscribe to my newsletter, right? So he's kind of built in this like loop where he's gaming LinkedIn to gain more subscribers, which makes him easier for him to gain LinkedIn. And he just kind of does this thing every single week. The content has to be good. It has to be all these things, right? But that's an interesting way where you think about it. How do you take your social and how do you have it impact your newsletter? How do you take your newsletter and have it impact your social, right? And like you should be playing off of these channels of pulling one person into the next experience. Another great one, at like SaaStock is a great one example, right? Everyone's coming up to this event, and you'll notice some of the speakers will say like, hey, this is the slide. Everyone take your phone out and take a picture. And if you post it on LinkedIn and tag me in it, and one lesson you learned or whatever it might be, I'll give you X. Could be a free copy of, here's 10 other ways you can do this or whatever it might be. And what you do in that case is, if I'm speaking to an audience of 150 people and I can get 30 people to do it, well, I've just opened myself up online to their 15, 20,000 people who are now all going to go talk about this thing online because they posted something. I can then use that as social proof to book my next speaking gig, say like, hey, I spoke at SaaStock, and look, here's some of the feedback from some of the attendees, and I now have 20 social posts because I asked someone to do it. And so those are examples, I think, of when you think about the things you're going to be doing. It's not always just I need to be doing more things. It's how do you do it smarter? How do you make sure one thing feeds into another, and think you through some of those growth loops? There's probably hundreds of those types of examples that you could map out, but those are just a few that I think are some of the better ones. And then, yeah, this is the don't build a brand. I think is one of the easiest ways. I think ads with real people always work way better. Copy that isn't boring. So you can go look at, like I said, on LinkedIn and on Facebook, you can see any ad any company is currently running. Because of all the election stuff in the States, Facebook cracked down and has kind of like transparency rules now. So you can see any current ad they're running. LinkedIn, you can see the same thing. And so take the time to look at the competition to see what everyone else is doing before you just start running ads or running creative, because it can make a big difference. And then this is kind of some of the other things where nobody likes to talk about this too much. I call it marketing's dirty secret, which is understanding tech stack and data, right? We talk about like data scraping. Every company does it. Every marketer is doing it. Nobody really ever talks about it or shares out the playbooks for how they're doing it. So I'll give you a few examples. One is I use a tool called Purple Sonar. There's Built With, there's all these other tools, right? But Purple Sonar, and I know some of the other ones can do it, is a tool which basically can tell you what tech is being used on any website. And so we talk about how do you find the 5%? Well, one of the ways we would do it is we wanted to see who had Zendesk. And so we could run basically a scrape to find out anyone who installed Zendesk code on their site 9 months ago. And why 9 months ago? You could probably take a guess. They signed a year-long contract, right, with Zendesk. So they're about 3 months away from their renewal. So before we go out targeting anyone who's a Zendesk customer, I don't want to target someone who still has 11 months left on a contract, right? Like they're just not going to switch. Someone who has 3 months left, though, that's a really interesting person to go after for us. And so we started putting together like contract buyout offers and targeting just that pool of people who had 3 months left, where it's like, hey, we'll buy out the remainder of your contract for switching, or getting them 3 months free. There's lots of ways you can do it, but understanding like what are some of the signals you can find out from companies online, that, and maybe it's a adjacent tech that they're installing, right? Like anyone who installs this naturally would be a good fit for this. So they just installed a marketing automation tool. Okay, maybe like lead scoring would be the next natural thing they would add on now that they have the system in place. And so can you get an alert set up that anytime someone installs this, you're getting triggered off of it, right? Or, hey, anytime someone is now posting about hiring for X role, right? Whether it be a sales engineer, now it probably means that they're going to start looking at these types of tools. And so what are some of those signals for your buyers, and how can you actually like get that data at scale is going to be really valuable for you to try to figure out kind of the go-to-market. And I think that's what, like, understand their intent, what they're trying to do. And then if you can take that and deliver like personalized experiences with it. And so there's a tool called Hyperize. There's lots of like personalization tools out there. I think like Mutiny's one, there's a few other, and they're like $20,000 a year. They're not cheap. And they do really cool personalization stuff, but Hyperize is $99, I think. It allows you to customize landing pages, emails, websites. And so a great example of this is we built a custom landing page that was like around intent data at G2, where we want someone to hit the page and it dynamically show an image of like, hey, here's the last 90 days of your intent data for your company, and here's the companies that we're looking at your category, and showing them the actual companies, right? And then the CTA was basically like, do you want to get more of the data, or do you want to get a free download, a free report of this for 90 days? Awesome, right? That's an example of like, we figured out the offer that would be valuable. That wasn't a demo. We were giving them away product data pretty much, but we were in that call going to show them how to utilize it. And so we built out these landing pages that were super customized using Hyperize. Cost us $100 and just ran marketing email campaigns and used basically the same images and personalized them into the emails as well. And so you can do lots of stuff with really low cost tools if you can figure out some of this tech. And so that's an easy one. And then I think the final one is really the concept of all this doesn't really matter if you're not actually adding true value, right? Like these are all hacks and things you can do that are interesting, but if like what you're actually sharing out is not that valuable, it's not really probably going to work that well. And so I think one of the easy litmus tests is like, is this actually content you would want to read? Is this content, if you were the buyer, you would engage with? Like, think how much content gets put in front of you guys, and like, you probably 70-80% of it is like, I'm not reading that, right? This is like so basic, or like that's not interesting. Like, you know, someone's calculator where you know, an ROI calculator about how to use the ROI I'm going to get from your tool is not that interesting to me, because let me guess, it's going to save me tons of money, right? And so figuring out like what's actually of value to your buyer is a super important piece of it. And I know we're getting short on time here, so I'm going to pick up the pace, but I think the final kind of piece is really like the culture of the marketing team is on you to own and build. And so when I think about the best marketing teams I've been a part of or worked with, really comes down to 4 things. They're fearless to try new things. So they're willing to test lots of different things, like lots of different tactics. They move fast, right? They want to figure out what works. The only way they're going to get to figure out what works if they try a lot of things, and you need those at bats. They're really focused as well. They're not just doing things randomly because they seem like cool ideas. Everything rolls back up to the North Star metric of what they're being measured on, right? Whether it's marketing pipeline or marketing revenue or trial signups, whatever it might be, they understand the metrics of what they're trying to achieve. And so it's very easy to say, like, here's the thing that I'm going to focus in on. And so I used to call this like the number that's going to get me fired, right? Because in marketing, there's 100 things you might want from the marketing team. Like, oh, we should have more newsletter subscribers. We should have, more engagement on social. We should have all these things. But what's like the real number that would get someone fired, right? Is it trials? Is it, marketing source pipeline? Your marketer should know what that is, right? Because then it's very easy for them to prioritize where they should actually be focusing the team's effort or their efforts and the budget and what they're trying to build, because it's very easy to get diluted in what you're trying to do. And then I think looking at your failures as victories, because most of it will fail, right? And so you're not one step closer to figuring out what works, and encourage big thinking. So like all these things, like we talked about, of trying different things out, testing new channels, having brand and creative that doesn't feel like everyone else. That takes a while for most people to want to do as a marketer. You have to have a level of confidence, and it's way easier if you have the founder or CEO pushing you to do these things, saying like, hey, let's try this. Like, I don't care if it fails. Like, let's try something that's different here, right? And let's push how we're thinking about this. And then I think with that, though, really limiting the impact, right? Like if you want to test out a new campaign, you don't have to go out and spend the full marketing budget on it to try something out. Always think of MVP versions. Like, how do we test a small amount of these things before we start rolling this out as a big campaign or a big switch? And then having kind of a backlog of ideas of, here are all the things we could be doing or should be doing, because most of the time people try to brainstorm when they're behind the number, or it's like, we need ideas, when in reality, like, you should have a backlog of 30 ideas, 40 ideas that you should be thinking of. And I don't know if I'll have time to the exercise, but I'll give you one example of kind of all this kind of culminating in a campaign. So this is a piñata. You can send piñatas through piñatagram.com. At the time, they were about $20. We had at the marketing team at G2 a backlog of ideas where every month people would just randomly put ideas into a Asana board, and they were stupid, great, horrible. It was all of it, right? And so, and I always used to try to put in the worst ideas, try to make everyone feel like, okay, like he put in these horrible ideas, like my idea will be safe, right? And kind of set the stage of like, no idea is a bad idea. And one of the ideas was a piñatagram. Someone was like, hey, I saw this on Instagram. We should send everyone piñatas. And we're like, what? Like, why? Right? And so as we started to brainstorm the idea, the copy actually we put on the piñata, and it goes right on the outside, was beating the competition on G2 is way more fun than beating this cute piñata. And that was the message. And we sent it out to 100 people. So it cost us, $2,000 to run this direct mail campaign 1 month. And we had a whole BDR follow-up campaign with it. We ended up booking 20 meetings out of those 100 people for $2,000, right? With like CMOs, VPs of marketing at these companies, because if you get a piñata to your desk, you're going to remember it. And when someone follows up and it's like, I sent you a piñata, you're going to open the email and be like, why the hell did this person send me a piñata, right? And so this is an example of like, this is a gamble risk campaign. Like our CEO probably, if he saw this idea, he'd probably like, that's a horrible idea. I at the time was like, I don't know if this is going to work. Could just be money down the drain. But it's one of those things where we had the budget, we had the time, we had the space to have these creative ideas to try to push things forward, right? And so, and we limited the impact, right? At the time, we were a Series C company, so our monthly ad budget was way higher than $2,000. So running a small $2,000 test wasn't going to cost us a month. But once it worked, suddenly it was like, oh, we were sending out hundreds of piñatas every single month. I think we were their biggest customer probably for a while. And then we were just doing this as a monthly campaign where every month it was like, sales, give us the 500 people you want us to send a piñata to, right? And so eventually that kind of changed and we ended up doing different types of campaigns. But that's an example, I think, of trying to set the team up to think outside the box and push the envelope in terms of the type of marketing you're doing.